Hello and welcome to P2 Corporate Reporting with me, Martin Jones. This is ACCA P2 Corporate Reporting coming to you from London, as you can tell from the shard behind me. I'm sitting in a chair. Unusually, I normally sit on a bar stool, so you can probably just see, there you go, you can see the orange of that chair behind me. So if you're not used to seeing that, that's what's going on there. What can I say apart from let's go mini-me? And there I am with my email. You know the drill, guys. You can email me directly using this email. That's the recommended mode of communication, and many of you are doing exactly that already, sending me lots of questions and queries and so on. That's good. And you can also email me through the website, through this channel, through Interactive, through Canvas. It does work, but it is an extra layer, and like any extra layer, it increases extra risk of technology failing. So that's the way to get through to me. So this is ACCA P2 Global Live Sessions with me, Martin Jones. And I'm just going to wake up the slide. There we go. And then down we go. So on the first week, we did basic groups. Then we went on to complex groups, then foreign currency. And last time that we were together, 1,000 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we did cash flow statements and current issues. And I set you up with some homework questions, including those homework questions you can see in a list on the right-hand side. If you look at what we're doing today, it sounds much more like the heartland of financial reporting. That's very much what we're doing for the remaining 4 sessions. Today is Tuesday. For those of you watching this as a recorded session, this live session is on a Tuesday. There's going to be today, Tuesday, then Thursday, then the next Tuesday, then another Thursday. That makes 4 sessions. 4 added to the original 4 gives us 8. And once we get to that 8th session, we are done. We are finished. We are sorted. And what we do over these remaining 4 sessions is what you might call financial reporting. You know, the real accounting, like stuff like performance, revenue recognition, provisions, moving on to the more fancy stuff like non-current assets, next time I see you, which is stuff like impairment and revaluation and stuff like that. And then on the following Tuesday, moving on to the more advanced stuff like leases and share-based payment and pensions accounting, a little bit more advanced. And then it's the real rocket science on the final session, session 8, where we do financial instruments. So basically it's the whole of financial reporting apart from the groups in these 4 sessions. So the groups is in the bag, the current issues is in the bag as well. So these 4 sessions are for the rest, for the proper financial reporting. What else do I need to say? Probably should say this now and repeat it again every single session. We had a mentoring session together during the 2 weeks between these, 2 blocks of teaching. And that mentoring session is available to you now. And I highly recommend it at any point, because actually what it does is it covers chapter 13 on tax. This subject, tax, is kind of a sit-alone subject, and you can study it at any time. You can study it at the end if you want to, or you can study it now. It is recorded in the mentoring session 1. It is available already for you to look at. Some of you I know have already looked at it, but some of you may not have done. So chapter 13 on tax is already available in the mentoring session. So that brings us to today, and today is chapter 6 and 7, or at least a big chunk of chapter 7. So the main thing really is the performance reporting. So the performance reporting involves me. This seat is not very comfy, I've just discovered. It's actually not level. That's not a very good thing to discover once you've gone live, is it? You should really discover. I've been sitting on this seat now for, 20 minutes, and it's only just now started to hurt my back. That's not very good, is it? Terrible timing. Well, let's hope I survive. So we're going to go to the class notes. There they are there. And you'll see a little bit of highlighting. And that reminds me to do my usual test. I'm going to remove that highlighting, if I can. And I can. And I'm going to highlight something and you're going to tell me, yep, I know what you have highlighted. So this is a test just to make sure that we are coming through to each other. What is it that I have highlighted directly over my head? Please tell me that, and I will know that we are talking to each other. Very good. And that brings me to the welcomes. Welcome, Greg. Welcome. I should really learn how to pronounce this because Humayun and I correspond every single day, every hour almost. Is it Humayun? Or should I call you Zuberi? What would you prefer? Humayun. Humayun. Welcome Humayun. Welcome Greg. Welcome Punit. Welcome one and all. Welcome those Saturday crew watching this as a recorded session. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to chapter 6. Zuberi. You prefer Zuberi. I will call you Zuberi. Welcome Zuberi. So, what's the quickest way of doing this? There's a little trick down at the bottom here. I can actually zip off to this by using that over there. Yeah, that will work. And then press go. Oh, wow, well done. Performance reporting covers the subject of performance reports, first of all. Performance reporting is the communication of performance using two statements. There's one statement of cash flow called the cash flow statement. There is one statement of position called the position statement, called the balance sheet. But there are two performance statements. And the two performance statements, the two performance reports are called the P&L and the OCI. So there are two performance reports. There are two performance reports. They are the P&L and the OCI, always known by their abbreviations. And the key thing to learn here is what goes through the OCI. Everything goes through the P&L except what goes through the OCI. It's slightly naff, but that is the way that the financial reporting works. And all I want you to do is to learn this mnemonic heaps. It is a rather wonderful coincidence that the heaps in a heap at the bottom of the performance report. There are 5 things that go through the OCI, and they are hedging, foreign exchange, actuarial remeasurements, PP revaluations, and strategic equity. Now, as I read that list, I'm certainly not expecting you to know any of them. None of them. I'm expecting you to know none of them. But I'm expecting you to start to get the idea of performance reporting. So I'll wave my hands around a little bit more, and then we will say goodbye to this stuff and move on. So the performance report has got 2 halves, 2/3, 1/3. Top of the page is this thing called the P&L with the sales and the cost, and at the bottom is this dumping ground called the OCI. And the way that the rules work is the IFRS tell us what goes through the OCI, and if a thing doesn't go through the OCI, then it just automatically drops into the P&L. So if you look, there's no D for depreciation in heaps, is there? So depreciation just ends up in the P&L. There's no S for sales, so sales just ends up in the P&L. Only those 5 things. So hedging, foreign exchange, actuarial remeasurements, PP revaluation, and strategic equity. Now, hang on a second. Can you see the chapters on the right-hand side? That's telling you where you're going to study these things. Wait a second. Of these things, one of them we've studied already. It's this one here, isn't it? We have actually done that one already. So 4x on foreign subs goes to the OCI. 4x on foreign subs goes to the OCI. But what's this other stuff? When are we going to learn hedging? When are we going to learn actuarial remeasurements? When are we going to learn PP revaluations? When are we going to learn strategic equity? We're going to learn those things when we get to those chapters. Okay? So Punnett has asked the question, what is strategic equity? And the answer is, well, we're going to look at that in chapter 12. And when we get there, I'll refer to strategic equity going through the OCI, and you'll say, oh, yeah, I remember that. You haven't learned strategic equity yet. When you do, you'll be aware of the OCI. Okay, so the yellow fellas we're going to do over the next few days together. It's basically just a week, isn't it, really? Which brings us to the next fella. The next fella is prior period adjustments. Prior period adjustments mean that they're literal. What you do is you, perhaps I need to wave my hands around a bit for this one as well. So you've got the current figures this year, right? And you've got the comparatives next to them. Those comparatives are just copied from last year's FS. But when would you go around changing, adjusting the prior period figures? You would adjust the prior period figures if there is a fundamental error in last year's figures, or there's a fundamental change in accounting policy. Sorry, I read that the opposite way around to the way it's presented. If there's a fundamental change in accounting policy or an error in last year's FS. Now, by far the easiest is by far the most common to be examined. So the examiner does something wrong in this year's FS, but he was doing it wrong last year as well. So you tell him how to correct this year's figures, which you can just change by changing this year's figures, but you tell him to correct last year's error, he needs a prior period adjustment. So it comes up really often just for one mark. You know, there's an error that is happening this year that was happening last year as well. How do you change this year's figures? You just change them. How do you change last year's figures? With a prior period adjustment. It's a really, really simple idea. The second one, the first one as I've presented it, the fundamental change of accounting policy, is not at all easy. This word policy is a very complex and wobbly word. But we can make it easy by highlighting the one that is relevant to us. The only time that you get a change of accounting policy these days, is with a new IFRS. Like what? Like IFRS 15. Isn't that cute? That looks rather nice, doesn't it? So there's a new standard on revenue, IFRS 15, and it replaces, I might as well say that's the standard number, which is IAS 18. Now you don't need standard numbers, so it doesn't matter what the standard is now, it doesn't matter what the standard was then. All you need to know is the content, which is of course what I'm going to teach you in a second, right? So you don't need standard numbers, but in this context it might be easier if I use it. So last year you were using IAS 18 because that was applicable on your stock exchange, and this year you're using IFRS 15 because IFRS 15 is applicable on your stock exchange. You're now doing IFRS 15, that's fine, that is right, and you were doing IAS 18, and that was fine, that was right. But it's non-comparable. What you need to do with last year's figures, you need to make them comparable with this year's figures. This year's figures use IFRS 15, so you go back and adjust the prior period figures so that you get consistency of accounting. So the figures in both columns, the current and the comparative, use IFRS 15. So when do you have an adjustment of the comparative figures, when do you have a restatement of the comparative figures, when there's an error in the comparatives, or when there's a new IFRS. Okay? What's a good example of a new IFRS? IFRS 15. So let's see if I can do this like this. Yeah, I'd like to just teach this straight to you, and then we'll see how we go with that. The really big thing about revenue recognition is there's two different models. There's the at model and the over model. Sales are recognized either at a point in time or over a period. And as it's there in front of me, I'm going to use this word formally. Actually, this at and over model has been with us forever. It really has. It's been with us forever. I think Punnet's just ask a question, I'll just answer it. The best way to answer a question is like this, Punnet. Here we go. So you've got this year's figures and you've got last year's figures. Prior period adjustment is the process of changing the figures to make them comparable. So what you do is you change the entire FS to make them comparable with this year. So the prior period adjustment is the process of restating the comparatives, and the prior period adjustment, it's a strange kind of question. I'm not exactly sure where you're coming from with this, Punnet, but do prior period adjustments come as a separate line on the P&L? No, that doesn't happen. So we just say we're adopting IFRS 15 for the first time, okay? So the revenue for the current year is 200 million. But that 200 million is based on IFRS 15. Last year, the revenue was 190 million. And that was the revenue that was reported. But that 190 million was based on using IAS 18. And we're not using IAS 18 anymore. What we do is we go back and restate that figure to make it comparable with this year. So what is the figure we would have had last year if we had been doing IFRS 15? So the figure that we would have had last year would have been not 190 but 192. So what we do is we make that figure into 192. There you go. All right, that's the simplest way of saying it. So what you do is you make the comparatives comparable. So this figure is 200 because it's using IFRS 15. This figure in last year's FS was 190. Last year's FS are over here, right? And you pick them up and you dust them off. But then you adjust them. Oh, that shouldn't be 190 using IFRS 15. That should be 192. So there we go, whacking 192. So prior period adjustment is the process of adjusting the prior period figures. Okay. Revenue recognition. So there's two different models, at and over. And the at and over model has been around with us forever, for absolutely ever. But what was problematical about the old standard, which was called IAS 18, as I just mentioned there, was that although it had the at and the over model, it didn't have a way of distinguishing between them. It basically said, it's over to you, use intuition to distinguish between at and over. And that worked pretty well, apart from some creative accountants would know perfectly well that this was at, but they'd use over because it was convenient for them, because it gave them the profit they wanted. Or when it was over, they'd use at, or they'd use the wrong at, or all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So the basic idea of at and over has been with us forever. But what's new is nowcas. The way that the IFRS works is it tells you the three sources of over revenue, and if revenue is not over, then it's at. So at is described as the default. Can you see? Does it say that? No, it doesn't say that. At is entity recognises revenue over if one of the following criteria is met. If it's not over, then it's at. So it's nowcas, and I want to show you the nowcas. It's nowcas. No alternative use, customer controlled, asset, and simultaneous. So if your revenue is of that form, then you would recognise the revenue over the period. If the revenue is not of that form, then you would recognise the revenue at the point the control transfers. So now we need to sort of get into this. So can you see that there are examples in each of nowcas? I think what I'll do is I'll explain the example and then just give you another, and explain the example and give you another. Some students find this really easy. It's completely flippant obvious, and other students find it really, really awkward. I find simultaneous the easiest myself, so I think I'll start with that. So here we go. Simultaneous, a source of revenue that's simultaneous is one that where the customer consumes at the same time that the supplier supplies. So you are going to be the guy looking at the revenue. You are the supplier, and I'm your customer. Okay. Now let's let's stick with that. Because you're going to be the guy that's providing the service, and I'm going to be the guy that's consuming the service. And we're going to see if there's simultaneity between you delivering and me consuming. And the classic one is this one: the mobile phone company provide a line for you. So you are the mobile phone company, and I am the mobile phone user. Now, we're not talking about the mobile phone itself. We're talking about the 4G. Now, can you see that? Of course you can't. It'd be ridiculous. Oh, you can just about see the picture of my... Oh, there we go. There's my dad, my now deceased dad, with my son. That was the last time he was able to hold my son. So I keep that on my phone. So there's a picture of my dad, but what you can't see is that the 4G is up there in the top center, actually. And that 4G is accurate. Sorry, not accurate? What was I trying to say? I don't even know what word I was trying to use. Active, there you go. That 4G is active now. I'm not actually using it, but my phone is. So it's pulling down emails, it's doing its thing. You know what phones are like, they just carry on chugging away, don't they? Even when you're doing something else, when you're having a beer, or in my case, I'm teaching you. So I am consuming the phone line as you, Vodafone, provide me with the service. Therefore, the revenue would be recognised over the period. So if I were to pay, say, for example, £120 for a year, then you would recognise that £120 not at any point, but over the year, £10 per month, okay? So you recognise the revenue over the period because there is simultaneity between you delivering and me consuming. And you're delivering the 4G to me now, and you're still delivering it now, and you're still delivering it now, and I'm consuming now. All of those individual nows, I was consuming. It's the best one, actually. The mobile phone company provide a line. So it's not the phone, it's the line. The phone is an at, by the way, so it's not the phone, it's the line. And it's the best one, really. It's no doubt about it, it's the best one, but it's probably not the most visual. So I'll tell you what, I'll go for the most visual. So you are going to provide me with a massage, and I need it because I've had a really, really bad back for the last forever, since I saw you last, actually. And this seat, as I say, isn't helping. It's slightly like that. My bum cheek is a bit up, which is not very good for my back, is it? So you put your elbow. Oh, that's the spot. Oh, goodness me. Oh, it's exactly where I need it. Oh, yeah. Oh. As you deliver your elbow into my back, I consume at the same time as you deliver. So you deliver and I consume. There is simultaneity of consumption. So the example that we're going to go for there, go for orange maybe. Orange, does orange work? Let's try orange. Would be, so another EG would be a massage. Now, a massage is a very good one because it's very clear that I consume as you deliver. But it's also a bit of a bad one because it'd be very unusual to have a massage that went on for days and months and months and days. But if you gave me a massage for, I don't know, 2 hours, you would recognise the revenue over the period. You'd recognise the revenue over those 2 hours. And if that happened to straddle a year end, then you'd recognise half of the revenue in 1 year and half of the revenue in the other year, even though I might have paid up front. So even though I've paid up front, you'd recognise the revenue half in 1 year and half in the other year. So a massage would be another good example. And there's lots of services that like this. So gigs, where the musician's playing their chords. So you're playing chords to me. Every time you play a chord, I hear it and I consume. Another one, of course, is this thing here. As as I speak, you consume. There's a slight delay on the internet, isn't there? But you might notice it's very small. Oh, very well done. Yes, even before I'd suggested that one, Zubari had put that one up, would be another good example. So teaching, it was actually the one I was thinking of, but for some reason I changed it to massage. Absolutely. So you teaching me, you over the internet, you would recognise the revenue over the period of the course. Or of course, actually, it's the other way around, isn't it? I am teaching you. So LSBF uses over revenue recognition. Exactly. The next one is, as you can see, customer controlled assets. So you supply me, but I remain in control of my asset. And an engineering company restore an old castle for a trust. So it's my castle, and during the whole time that your engineers are crawling all over my castle, at any point I can say, get off my castle. I'm still in control of the castle while you are working on it. So if there is a customer controlled asset upon which you are working, then you would recognise the revenue over the period. And the examiner had something, very similar to this. It was actually very similar, but it can't be all that different, to be honest. Something along the lines of maintenance works really well. The examiner used this one in an exam question. We're going to do it on the revision course, actually, where you are working. What are you working on? You're working on my railway over a period of 18 months, and you pay in advance. You pay in advance. You pay me in advance. Yes. Which way? I'm getting a bit mixed up now. Who's doing what for? So you are working on my railway, and I pay you in advance. Sorry about that. I just got mixed up with the you and me. So you are providing maintenance. My wobbly railway in North Wales has gone a bit wobbly. You're going to be working on it every night of 18-month period, and you pay me I pay you 180 million in advance. But that 180 million, should it be recognised at the point that I hand over the 180 million at the start, or should it be recognised over the 18 months, 10 million per year, so 10 million per month? Which is appropriate? Should be recognised at or over? Well, you're working on my railway. I'm not going to tell you to get off my railway, but I could at any point. Because I am in control of my asset. This is revenue related to a customer controlled asset. When you have customer controlled asset revenue, you recognise the revenue over the period. So I would hand you 180 million, and you'd recognise that 180 million, 10 million per month over the period. All right, that's customer controlled asset. So when you have customer controlled asset, then you recognise the revenue over the period. And then the last one is no alternative use. Now the IFRS does say no alternative use, but what it means to say is something slightly different. It means to say no alternative customer. And basically it's bespoke engineering is what it is. So the example here is a constructor builds a road for the government. So I want a road between here and Bristol to go parallel to the M4. I want another motorway parallel to the M4, and I am going to pay you in advance for that road. But should you be recognising the revenue over the period or at a point in time? Well, it depends. No alternative use means no alternative customer. You are making the road for me. If I tell you I don't want that road once it's finished, could you sell it to someone else? Could you sell this road in Britain to France? Very unlikely. So it's got no alternative customer. When there is, this is a bit difficult because it's kind of like a double negative. If there is no alternative customer, then you do recognise the revenue over the period. But if there is an alternative customer and you could sell to someone else, then you recognise the revenue at. Now I'm going to push that one a little bit more difficult here. So I'm going to show you because of course, we've got construction there, and therefore it's natural to think of this as construction revenue. Now, construction revenue used to have its own IFRS, but one of the problems is there was no definition of what construction was. So now we don't bother with the definition of what construction is. We just want to know if there's an alternative customer. So you build me a road, the UK government, right the way across England. Could you sell it to France? Could you sell it to Russia? No, you couldn't. But you also build me a block of flats in South London. There's 18 individual units in this block of flats. Could you sell the block of flats to France or Russia? Of course. In fact, actually, you could sell each individual flats to individuals. Actually, you're making the 18 flats for me, and I'm not going to tell you to naff off. But if I did tell you to naff off, could you sell the flats to someone else? Yes, you could sell the flats to someone else. Therefore, it is an alternative customer source of revenue. So it's not a no alternative customer. And if it's not a no alternative customer, then it's not over, it's at. So flat revenue recognition is now recognised at the point that the keys are handed over to the customer, and you wouldn't recognise over the period of the build, because you can always sell flats to other people. But bespoke engineering, like constructor builds a road for the government, builds a bridge, builds an airport, something like that, something you couldn't sell to someone else, then that would be it. So what about, we're staying with bespoke engineering. Let's go for bespoke software. So you build me some software. Is it the kind of software that could be sold to someone else? Yes. Okay, then you recognise the revenue at. Is it the kind of software that can only be sold to me? Yes, it's the kind of software that could only be sold to me. Well, in that case, there's no alternative customer, then that would be recognised over. So what you want to know is, you are going to sell to me, but if I told you to naff off, could you sell to someone else? Yes or no, that's the idea. So, e.g., constructor builds a road for the government, or e.g., bespoke software. Basically anything bespoke. Even a bespoke suit. That'd be a good example, actually, a bespoke suit. Could you sell to someone else? My particular physique is not that unusual. You might just about be able to sell it to someone else, but I'm not. Right? I'm kind of tall and slim. Probably it'd be awkward. If I chose an unusual colour, you'd be really struggling to sell to someone else. So bespoke software, definitely. Bespoke suits, probably. But, IFRS 15 is still not perfect. Well, I've made quite a big thing of nowcast, haven't I? And the reason is that is by far the examiner's most common question. Revenue is basically guaranteed in the exam. Basically, you're guaranteed to get revenue in the exam. But what tends to come up most often as regards revenue is what the examiner does is he gives you a story and he's already done the revenue recognition and you tell him he's wrong, is how the game's played. And he's very, very fond of this way round. I'll say the general idea, and then I'll give you the way round he likes it. So, what he does, I'll give you first of all the first kind of question, which does come up, but not that often. The examiner tells you a story and asks you what kind of revenue should you use? Should you use at or should you use over? So the examiner tells you a story and asks, should it be at or over? And what you do is you apply nowcast to figure out whether it's at or over. Now that does come up, but it's fairly rare. It is much more common the examiner gives you a story and he's already made a decision, but he deliberately gets it wrong. And it's almost always this way round. He's done at when it should be over. So he tells you a story, it's clearly over revenue, but he's recognised it at a point in time. So what you do is you shoot him down with basically 3 marks. You say there are 2 forms of revenue, at and over. At is recognised at the point control transfers, and over the period the performance obligation is fulfilled. I'm sorry, I did that wrong. I said it right, but my fingers were going wrong there. The first thing you say is There's at and over revenue recognition. At is at the point that control transfers, and over is over the period that the performance obligation is fulfilled. However, the way we distinguish between at and over is by using nowcas. Then you whack down the nowcas, then you apply it to the scenario. So he tells you a story where there's bespoke software being recognised at the point the cash transfers, and you say, no, Graham, you're wrong. He tells you a story whereas maintenance recognised at the point that the cash transfers, and you say, no, Graham, you're wrong. One mark for no, Graham, you're wrong, but you want 3 marks. The 3 marks are, there are 2 forms of revenue, at and over. Now cash distinguishes between them, then you apply it to the scenario to tell him he's wrong. And that's how it works. That's it. One more time, because it comes up in every single exam. The examiner tells you a story. He's done at when he should have done over. You tell him he's wrong, but you don't just jump in there with the conclusion. You tell him there are 2 forms of revenue, at and over. They're distinguished using nowcas. Now applying it to the scenario, you're wrong. And then the other bits of IFRS 15 are examined, but far less frequently, and therefore I'm going to kind of skirt through them a little bit quicker. It's all about nowcast, really. When you come on revision, which will be in a couple of weeks after this, won't it? So it's 4 weeks' time. When you come on to revision, you'll find me going nowcast, nowcast, nowcast over and over again. But I might not be using any of this actually at all, but maybe I will, because it does get examined, but not that often. Actually, this thing about nowcast sits in a 5-step model, and it is the 5th step in a 5-step model. It's the revenue recognition, sorry, I should big that up. So where does nowcast live? Nowcast lives here. And the way that the IFRS works is it says there are 4 steps before you even think about nowcast, which means in real life what you're supposed to do is for every single sale there are 5 steps. Now in the examiner doesn't give you enough time to actually work your way through the COPA to give it its name. You just go straight for the on the revenue recognition, you just nowcast. But there are, in fact, 5 steps, and they are indeed COPA. I'll just highlight that. They are COPA. And the first step is a threshold thing. Contract criteria. Don't even think about revenue recognition unless you have a customer and a contract with that customer, is the idea. And here are the contract criteria. It's a mnemonic within a mnemonic. So the first step is don't recognise revenue unless you have PISA, which is probable collectability, identifiable rights and obligations, substance, and approval. How should I do this? I'll do this backwards, I think. I'll do it ACIP. PISA is, but ACIP. Don't even think about revenue recognition until the customer has shaken hand with the supplier. Once I shake your hand, then you start to think about revenue recognition. If we're still in negotiation, don't think about revenue. It's a fairly obvious point, but there you go. Approval is saying, don't think about revenue until the negotiations are finished. All right, fair enough. S for substance is a tricky one, this one, but it's very important because it's related to the leases standard, and the leases standard is very, 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 very important this time around. Don't think about recognising the sale unless the sale is really a sale. Just because it's called a sale doesn't mean it's really a sale. Have you heard of sale and leaseback? Sale and leaseback is a clever form of finance. What you do is you transfer legal title to me, but then I transfer the entire use back to you. I then give you a bunch of cash. We call that sale and leaseback. But actually, I don't want the building. You continue to use it. It's still your building, but I have security over it because I have the legal title. I'm a bank. I don't want the building. What I want is you to repay me. And you do repay me, and you keep repaying me. And I'm happy with this lending. But if you go bust, I own your building. I've got super quality secured loan. A sale and leaseback is called a sale and leaseback. And the legal form is a sale and leaseback. But actually a sale and leaseback is really a loan. So what this is saying, substance is, don't recognise the sale as a sale unless it's really a sale. Just because it says it's a sale doesn't mean it's actually a sale. Now don't get me wrong, 99 out of 100, 99,999 sales out of 100,000, they're all real. So fake sales are very, very rare. But all it's saying is, I know fake sales are rare, but if there's a fake sale that isn't really a sale, don't recognise it as a sale. That's what that substance is saying. And it's important because we will be coming back to it in the context of leases. So shall I do that? See sale and leaseback. Shall I give you a chapter for that so you know you're coming back to it? So this is what we're doing now. So it's 6 is performance, 7 is provisions, 8, 9. So it's chapter 9. And what will happen in chapter 9 is I will teach you leases and then I'll teach you sale and leaseback. And when I teach you sale and leaseback, I'll say, do you remember that PISA thing with commercial substance? You only recognise a sale when it's really a sale. Well, that's this thing here. So it comes back at you. So this isn't the end of that. But the basic idea is only recognise a sale if the sale is real. And the technical name for that concept is substance. Only recognise the sale if the sale is a sale in substance, not just a sale in form. Identify the rights and obligations. It must be possible to work out what I'm going to do for you and what you're going to do for me. So we've definitely agreed terms. We know what's going on. Don't even think about revenue recognition until we've agreed terms, is what's saying. There must be identifiable rights and obligations. So, of course, your rights are my obligations and my rights are your obligations, okay? So you're the supplier, I'm the customer, and we've agreed what we're going to do for each other. Don't even think about revenue until we've got a solid agreement and we've shaken on it. The I and the A are quite closely related. So it's clear what we're doing for each other and we've shaken on it. So it's clear what we're doing for each other, that's the I, and we've shaken on it is the A, the approval. And then the last one is quite a cute one. This covers, what parents sometimes do for their kids. I will, let's just say, my son's only 5, so it doesn't really mean terribly much. But it's just not going to work if I use myself as an example, because it just isn't going to work. Because I want it to feel really real. So one of my mates says to his 18-year-old son, I'm going to sell you my bike for £100. And the 18-year-old son says, yes, Dad, I'll do that. I'll pay you in a month. But actually, both the son and the dad know that the son isn't going to pay. Okay? So you got the idea. So if you sell something to someone, but you know that they're never actually going to pay, if you know at the point that you sell to them that they're not going to pay, then that's not a sale, that's a gift. And gifts are not sales, so don't go recognising a sale because it's not, it's a gift. If you sell a bike to your 18-year-old son and you know he's not going to pay you the £100, you know he's not going to pay you the £100 because he never does and you never ask for the money, then that's a gift. Don't recognise a sale. Do you get the idea? But let's contrast it with bad debts. If you sell to your buddy a bike for £100 and you've had transactions with him before and he's always paid, but actually a real stroke of bad luck happens, poor fella ends up getting divorced, he's got no money and he never pays you, then that's not this. That's what's called a bad debt. So you recognise the sale because at the point of the sale you did think you were going to get the 100. You recognise the sale and the corresponding receivable. But if later the receivable goes bad, then you write it off as bad. So it's you only recognise a sale as a sale if there is probable collectability at delivery. Okay. So, you know, the Sun story is the classic example. You transfer something to someone and you think they're going to pay, then you recognise a sale. If later they don't pay, then you recognise a bad debt. That's fine, that's no problem. You can do that, that's no problem. But if you sell to someone and at the time you sell to them, when you hand over the bicycle, you already know they won't pay, then that's not a sale, that's a gift, okay? So if you hand over something to them and at the point that you hand over, you know that they won't pay, then that's not a sale. That's just a gift. So it's not a sale. So you need all 4 of PISA before you recognise a sale. In fact, you need all 4 of PISA before you even start to think of the rest of OPA. Now, the way that COPAR works is like this. It's not just COPAR. It's C, OPA, is the way it works. So there's a definite dividing line. You do your C, and you only think about anything else if you get beyond C. Then you do OPA in a flow, and once you've done your OPA, then you do your nowcast, then you do your revenue recognition. Now this middle section here, that's called unbundling. Actually, it's there already, isn't it? But I'll reinforce it. And this is a concept that does get examined occasionally. And it's quite easy, but it's also technical. And it's described at the bottom. So what I think I'll do is I'll look at what's described at the bottom, remind myself of what I wrote when I wrote these notes. Unbundling, can you see that just over my shoulder? Some contracts have more than one performance obligation. Indeed, some contracts have both at and over components. These contracts are described as bundled, and the process of separating the components is called unbundling. This unbundling occurs in steps 2 and 4 above. It really basically happens in 2, 3 and 4. The OPA, I think, is the easiest way of saying it. So how do I get started here? I think what I'll do is I'll start with the most important letter in this OPA. Can you see that? S in obligations. OPA is irrelevant if you're only doing one thing for the customer. But if you're doing 2 things for the customer, then you need to unbundle. Now, to get into unbundling, you need to understand bundling. And bundling is not accounting. Bundling is a marketing technique. Now, I'm going to go back to my phone, and you're going to be Vodafone. And you're going to provide me with 2 things for 1 price. Okay? For £1,000, you are going to provide me with a phone and a line for 2 years. So the 2 things you're going to provide are a phone and a line for 2 years. You do sell lines for 2 years as separate deals. Doesn't happen very often, but you do sell phones separately, occasionally. But you're not doing either of those for me. You're doing both. And what you're going to do is you're going to sell me these 2 products for 1 price. You're going to take these two products and sell them together at one price. This marketing strategy you are employing to attract me is called bundling. So you are bundling. You as in the directors. Now we'll have you as in the accountants working for the directors. Your directors above you are selling bundled product to their customers. You now have to take their bundling and unbundle it. The first thing that you do is you identify the performance obligations, plural. The first thing that you do is you identify the obligations. Easy, it's not difficult, you do it instantly. The two things that you are doing for your customer is you're selling a phone and you're selling a line. They're clearly two separate things being sold at one price. So you've got two obligations of this. Then you identify the one transaction price. Just check out that phrase there. It's not prices, it's price. The one price is 1,000. So you're going to sell both things for £1,000. Then you are going to allocate the transaction price to the obligations, And there are different ways of doing it, but the one that would probably be most common is you'd look, how much would you sell the phone for if you sold it on its own? You would sell the phone for 600 on its own. But you've not sold it on its own, you've sold the two things together for 1,000. So, presumably what we should do is we should say the 1,000 is 600 for the phone and 400 for the 2 years. And then finally finishing off with the COPAR, the revenue recognition, then you do a bit of nowcas. The 2-year line rental should be recognised over a period because the simultaneity of consumption between you delivering the service and me consuming the line. So that 2 years should be recognised over a period. But the phone should be recognised at the point that you transfer the risks and rewards to me, you know, the point at which I get control, which is the point of delivery. So what you would do in the first year of delivery is the 1,000. You would see if we've agreed terms. Yep, we fulfilled the PISA criteria, so that's the CA, the contract criteria fulfilled. Then you do the OPA, and you say, okay, there is 2 performance obligations on 1 price of 1,000. This is bundling, so we need to allocate the 1,000 between the 2 things. It's 600 for this, so therefore it's 400 for that. If it's 400 for that, it's 200 and 200 for each of the individual years. Then you do the revenue recognition. In the first year, you recognise the phone revenue at the point that the phone transfers from you to me, which is on the first day of the year. So you recognise 600 in revenue. And then over the next 12 months, you recognise 200 of revenue. Actually, I paid you 1,000 up front. So of that 1,000 up front, you recognise 800 as current revenue and 200 is held as future revenue, called deferred income. So you would recognise revenue of 800 in the first year. One component of the 800 is the AT on the phone, and the other component of the 800 is the 200, which is half of the 400 for the first year of phone supplies. And that's the full COPAR all done. Yes. Homayoun, the answer to your question is yes. I won't read out the question because, yeah, Zubairi's got a particular question that works for him. But the answer is yes. So, yeah. So, mobile phones is quite complex unbundling, and Vodafone's explanation of how they do their unbundling is very detailed. They've got, you know, like most companies, they've got a number of pages of accounting policies. Around about 5, I seem to remember. Of those 5 pages of accounting policies, 2 of them are on the unbundling. So mobile phone unbundling is the most common example. Can I take Humayun's example? I'm not going to read it out exactly as written because there's a danger of it not being useful. But I'll make up a question based on Humayun's example. You supply me with a television, and then a week later, your engineers come round to fit it into my home. And the reason there is a separation between the delivery and the engineers coming round is the delivery is just done by delivery dudes, but the engineering is done by real engineering dudes. And the reason we need real engineering dudes working on this television is it's a superstar television, not just any old television. It's a whole cinema, and it needs proper installation by engineers, not by delivery dudes. So what happens is you charge me a huge figure, £20,000. That £20,000 I pay in advance. Then your delivery guys come round and deliver the telly to my front room, to my cinema room. Then a week later, the engineers come around and actually fit it in to my room and get the speakers working and test everything. They take 6 hours to do it, but it's still only one day. So let's go back up to the top and co-par it, because it's worth doing, because Humayun's got quite a nice example there. So contract criteria. Is the PISA here? Yes, there's probable collectability. You know I'm going to pay you. I pay in advance. We know exactly what my rights are and my obligations are. You know what your rights are and your obligations. Your obligations are to come around and fit it, to deliver a telly and then fit it, and my obligation is to pay you money. Substance, of course, this is a real sale. Sorry, I'm just going to bring this up, this piece of criteria. I'm going through it looking down rather than actually having it over my shoulder. So yeah, this is a real deal. It's a real sale. Don't worry about that. And approval, of course there's approval. I've paid you the money already. So we've got the cut. What's happened to that fella? There we go. So we got the cut. That's all sorted. It'd be nice to go through with some ticks, wouldn't it? That might make you feel a bit better about this. So are there more than one obligation? Yep, there's more than one obligation. There's two obligations. You have the obligation to deliver a telly to me, and you also have the obligation to fit the telly into my cinema room. Okay, so there are two obligations. What is the one price that you're paying me? The one price you're paying me is £20,000. Now we do the allocation. That's tricky. And in the exam, just use whatever information is given in the scenario. There'll be something obvious, like it's estimated that the £20,000 is half for the telly and half for the fitting. So that's 10,000, 10,000. So we've done the OPA. The two obligations are the telly and the fitting. The total price is 20,000 and it's half-half, therefore 10,000, 10,000. Then we do the revenue recognition, which needs to be nowcas. Let's apply nowcas to the TV room. You're working in my TV room, and I can tell you at any point, get out of my TV room. So it's a customer controlled asset that you're working in. It's my house you're working in. You're improving my house. It's a customer controlled asset. So the servicing would be recognised over the period. But actually the period's very short, it's only 6 hours. But you would recognise the revenue over the 6 hours and not at any point in the 6 hours. It would be over that period of 6 hours. But the delivery of the telly itself is just a simple at. You're just delivering me a telly at a point in time. So the recognition of the telly would be recognised at the point the telly was delivered. And here comes the rub. Do you remember what I said? The telly was delivered 1 week before the service was done. The service was done 1 week after. And by pure luck, ha-cha! The year end just happened to fall between the telly being delivered and the service being done. I've paid you 20 grand up front. What should you do? Well, you have delivered the telly, so you'd recognise the telly revenue, but you don't recognise the service revenue until you do the service next week. And as it happens, next week is next accounting year. So, of the 20,000 that I've given you, you'd recognise 10,000 in revenue and you'd recognise 10,000 in deferred income on the balance sheet. of the 20,000 I've given you, 10,000 goes to the balance sheet as deferred income, and 10,000 goes to the P&L as revenue. That's unbundling. So that's Humayun's example expanded. And you can tell from what I've just said there, which is more than nothing, isn't it, that unbundling does come up. So if unbundling does come up, do use the language of unbundling. Ideally, you unbundle using OPA, the actual language of obligation, price and allocation. But as long as you're describing how the revenue should be split between this year and next year, it doesn't really matter the formal language. But if you can use the language of unbundling, that would be fine. Great. So it's time for a break. When we come back, we will be moving on from revenue. Time for a break. Let's move on.